Anyway, have any of you heard of the DARE program against drugs? Basically an anti-drug organization called DARE hired people to go to poor schools, talk to the kids how drugs were bad, etc. DARE always used to send the same guy to our school every year. He was a good-natured fat guy in his advanced 40s. He even used a DARE uniform, which was very old. You could easily tell he was poor as fuck like us. However, always used his own money to buy candies for us. One year he didn't show up. In his place, another guy came. From here, greentext. New guy reports on the school to give the DARE anti-drug talks. He looks somewhat young, like in his late 20s at most. He is not using a DARE uniform. Even more, he is carrying a real gun on the side of his chest. He is very aggressive and told us he was a top-class agent from our country and that we were all lucky to even meet him in person. All of us were like, shit, this guy is badass. Lady teacher has some disbelief on her face. New guy says that fat good guy retired and he was his replacement. He came during all the week to give us talks. Every time, he talked about very crude themes, like death, assault, weapons, which disturbed some of the kids. Then he talked about how we should go with him to the secret training grounds in order to become stronger if we feared the real world. He said that he would even let us use real weapons like rocket launchers and AK-47s if we accepted. Basically, we needed to get inside a bus with black sealed windows, and we couldn't tell under any circumstances to our parents where we were going. The bus was going to come at the end of the week. The day before the bus came, he crossed the line. He basically fingered one of the girls from our class in front of us, trying to show us how we should search female cavities for drugs. Our lady teacher was really freaking out, seeing how that guy was doing it in front of everyone. She asked the guy to back off and stop for the day. There was a clear tension, but he agreed to leave and asked us to come tomorrow to join the bus. Lady teacher went fast to talk to the other teachers and the director about the issue. She was nearly crying. Then she and the director came to the class and told us not to join the bus tomorrow. The next day, after all the kids entered the school, the teachers closed the school gates. The guy naturally came and asked to enter. All the teachers, some parents, and the director told him to fuck off, or that the cops were on their way, or that they were going to call them. The dude is mad as fuck, but goes to the bus and gets away. Lady teacher later comes to class and told us that the bad guy is not coming back. Next year, a normal DARE guy comes to give normal talks. Never knew what exactly happened with that good guy. Time later, I asked my lady teacher if she knew, and she told me that she and the director called DARE to know why he didn't show up in the first place the year of that weird incident after everything got solved. However, they told her that the fat guy went missing that year, and that's why they couldn't send him. To this day, I still think that the weird guy that came to our class killed fat guy and wanted to take our whole class somewhere to assault us or something. Uncle is son of wealthy ranch owners. Spends his time partying and doing shit. Gets a woman pregnant. He decides not to marry her. The woman's mother is rumored to be a witch. She also sells meat at the local market. Uncle goes to buy some meat for a party. Old woman reminds him to take care of her daughter as she is pregnant. Uncle doesn't care. Woman says he can't ignore her forever. Be partying in the ranch. One of his friends is leaving. He is too drunk. Uncle decides to ride on horse with him, in case he didn't remember the way. They ride through some woods in the middle of the night, when suddenly their horses get scared and start jumping and shit. They try to regain control, but the drunk friend falls down and his horse runs away. My uncle descends from his horse to help him. Uncle's horse screams in pain and runs away. Uncle gets scared. He feels something climbing on his leg. He tries to kick it, with no results. He sees a big-ass snake has his leg trapped. He tries to run but falls down. The snake advances all the way to his neck. The snake bites his neck, in a way that it didn't pierce it with fangs, and it didn't cause any damage, like just posing its lips around it. Then it leaves my uncle and goes away through the woods. My uncle and his friend walk the rest of the path on foot and scared. He stays in friend's house. Next morning he decides to return home, through normal streets in town, not the damn woods. Just out of curiosity, he goes to see the old woman in the market. She's there. He greets her, and she tells him he seems scared. He says he had a strange night. She tells him she hopes last night's warning was enough, and that she didn't like to drag her body through the woods, but if he made her do that again, she would kill him. He decides to take care of the pregnant woman and his child. My maternal grandma always tells the story, and to this day, she still gets visibly uncomfortable while speaking about it. Late 1950s, Mexico City. Older sister is about to marry, and asks grandma to accompany her as she delivers the invitations for street neighbors. Last stop is a vecindad in front of their house. A vecindad is a house divided in apartments, where a friend lives. Friend is babysitting her younger brother, the 4-year-old. Grandma and aunt keep talking with their friend for hours. Night falls. Around what grandma says was around 8 p.m., their friend's eyes go wide. Mind, friend was in the door, while grandma and aunt turn their backs to the street. Aunt asks what's going on. Friend can only mutter stuff and is freaking out, while pointing at something behind them. Friend's little bro starts screaming. Friend gathers enough breath to talk and yells Diablo, devil. Grandma and aunt turn around and almost faint. Behind them, in the middle of the street, stands what grandma still describes as a demon. Over 6 feet tall, blackish skin like a snake's, featureless aside from 2 red eyes, and a horn growing out of its face and curving behind the head. Grandma and aunt run inside the house and close the door shut, start praying and screaming for help. Some tenants show up and take to the streets, armed and searching for the creature. Friend's little bro dies a week later in his sleep. To this day, grandma says the demon went for the kid's soul. My aunt passed away in 2010, but her house is huge, and most people in my family have experienced supernatural stuff in there. There's at least 4 ghosts that have been identified. A little girl that appears in the kitchen, an old lady who haunts a shack in the rooftop, something that falls from the main stairs, and a pig that squeals and grunts in the laundry room during October and November. Bumping with stories from Mexico City. Tlatelolco, on October 2nd, 1968, in Las Tres Culturas Plaza, the main square within the Tlatelolco neighborhood in Mexico City, took place one of the worst massacres in Mexican history. Thousands of students from Mexico's main universities gathered in there for a pacific protest against the government's actions during the last months. Unknown to the students, the Mexican army placed snipers in the building and prepared an ambush using the Olympia Battalion, an elite branch of the Mexican army. The president, Gustavo Díaz Ordaz, ordered the army to suppress and silence the student movement in time for the 1968 Olympic Games. What ensued is one of the darkest episodes in Mexican history up to this day. Thousands of individuals were arrested or murdered. A large number of survivors were reported as disappearances and never seen again, a common tactic for the Mexican government back in the day. 2 decades later, on September 19, 1985, Mexico City was struck by a magnitude 8.1 earthquake, which caused the Nuevo Leon building, one of the tallest in the neighborhood, to collapse, with dozens of people still inside. People living close to Las Tres Culturas report encounters with shadows lurking in the corridors between the buildings, sounds of children playing and plastic balls bouncing in the night, blood seeping from stairwells during rainy days, as well as the agonizing screams and pleas of those murdered during the 1968 massacre. Pick related, it's the plaza. The forest of Chapultepec. One of the most well-known places in Mexico City is the forest of Chapultepec, a park housing several museums, a zoo, an amusement park, and a couple lakes inhabited by waterfowl and carps. The forest has its share of stories, ranging from packs of feral dogs and rabid squirrels to the famous house of Tio Tonya, a popular urban legend among teenagers and young adults. EVPs have been recorded by employees of the zoo and played in the horror radio show known as La Mano Peluda. The recordings contain whispers, chains being dragged, and other unnatural noises. However, the central piece of the forest is the castle, an imposing fortress built atop a hill and where significant events in Mexican history have taken place. During the 1840s, a group of military cadets fortified and attempted to defend the castle against an American invasive force. In 1860, the emperors Maximiliano and Carlotta lived there. Workers of the castle assure that Carlotta's ghost continues to wander the castle halls to this day, searching for her executed husband. Night watchmen tell stories of hearing steps, doors opening and closing on their own, and Carlotta's piano after midnight. Other witnesses, from visitors to the military cadets guarding the place during the day, have seen shadows and ghostly figures moving around the place. La Moira. La Moira is the name given to a house located in the neighborhood of Chapultepec. Abandoned today, La Moira is, according to urban legends, one of the most haunted places in Mexico. The original legend dates from the 1970s and talks about a kid named Marcos who trespassed into the house after hearing about it. Inside, Marcos supposedly witnessed paranormal activity, but what made him run from the place in fright was the sight of a hanged child in one of the upper floor's rooms. Years later, Marcos decided to return to La Moira in order to reassure himself that everything was a part of his childish imagination. Marcos never came out, and his body was eventually found, hung in the same upper room floor where he supposedly saw the dead child years before. Other stories talk about black magic rituals, black masses, and even demonic possession taking place inside the walls of La Moira. Eventually, the owners decided to capitalize on the popularity of the house and started giving nocturnal tours of it. The tours stopped after a while due to mysterious reasons, and the house remained abandoned for a few years. When it was reopened as a cultural center that, much like the nocturnal tours before, closed under mysterious circumstances. The Witch's House. Located in the famous Roma neighborhood, the Witch's House is a large building designed after European castles and palaces, and has been inhabited by Mexican celebrities like Silvia Pinal and Mauricio Garces. The Witch's House was a home of a witch and diviner known as Pachita, who used to be consulted by politicians and members of the Mexican entertainment industry in the years after the revolution. According to some people living in the house to this day, the ghost of Pachita still appears walking down hallways. Mexico City's International Airport. Behind the airport's runway, there is a place where all non-functional or retired planes are stored. Some airport workers tell stories about a little girl who appears among the planes, playing with a ball and sometimes even talks to them. During the construction of the airport's second terminal, a security guard found a little girl sitting in the corner of an unfinished building. He reprimanded and asked her to follow him to the exit, but the girl only stared at him and whispered, "Tie my shoelaces, please." The guard looked down and, much to his horror, saw that the girl had no feet and was actually floating in the air. The Devil's Alley. In the Mixcoac neighborhood, there is a narrow alley that used to be surrounded by trees to the point where the branches closed above and darkened it, fueling a legend about the devil showing up in the alley after midnight. Supposedly, a man who boasted about not being afraid of anything, even the devil, was challenged to walk through the alley at night. Much to his surprise and fright, he was met by a shady, deformed figure resting against one of the trees. The men ran away, scared after hearing the entity's laugh. Other popular stories talks about a woman in white who appears to passing vehicles in streets near the alley. The woman supposedly has been guilty of several accidents over the years. Pic related, a photo taken by the employees of the airport. The girl was supposedly inside an old Pan Am airplane. El Zocalo. El Zocalo is the Mexico City's main square, surrounded by the Metropolitan Cathedral, the ruins of the Aztecs' main temple, and the government palace. It's one of the oldest places in the entire city, dating back to the days of the Spanish conquest. People wandering through Zocalo at night are used to talk about a woman who joins them as they walk, even making small talk as they cross the square and the surrounding areas. But as soon as they realize something is off, the woman disappears among the crowds. On a curious note, those who mention walking next or talking to her are unable to remember her face or the exact details of the clothes that she wore. Don Juan Manuel's house. In the street of República de Uruguay, a few blocks away from El Zocalo, there is a house where a popular story took place back in the days of the Spanish colony. According to the legend, a jealous man named Juan Manuel sold his soul to the devil in exchange for gaining the knowledge of his wife's lover. The devil showed up and instructed Juan Manuel to step outside his house at 11 p.m. and wait for the first man who passed by. So he did. Juan Manuel waited, hidden, and stabbed the first man he saw. However, the next day, the devil appeared to him again, mocking him about killing an innocent man, but instructing him to keep killing people at the same hour until eventually the right one showed up. Every night, Juan Manuel waited in the dark, and as soon as a man came closer, he stopped him and asked, "Excuse me, what time is it?" 11. To which Juan Manuel answered, "Joyful, the one who knows the hour of his demise." According to the legend, Juan Manuel still appears at 11 p.m. in front of his house and repeats the same routine. Anyone answering his question will supposedly die on the spot. Insurgent 300 building. Between the Medellin and Insurgent avenues, in the Roma neighborhood, stands a building that was incredibly popular among Mexico's elite back in the 60s. Movie stars, singers, and intellectuals lived there during its heyday. The 15th and 16th floors are haunted by the ghosts of people who died in a fire. The ghost passengers. It's not unusual for cab drivers in the zones of El Rosario, Claveria, Calzada de los Misterios, or the bus stops located between the Tacuba and Panteon subway stations, the Central de Abastos, a fresh product market, and Cerro de la Estrella, Star Hill, to tell stories about mysterious passengers boarding the cabs after midnight, only to disappear as soon as they arrive to their destination. Most stories mention older ladies, men and children, all of them wearing black clothing or covering their faces with hats or veils. A popular legend mentions a young woman boarding a cab in front of a cemetery's gates. The driver, confused about picking up a woman in such a desolate and dangerous place at night, takes her home, but before arriving at the destination, the girl says, "I don't have money, but if you come tomorrow, my parents will pay you." So, the driver returns the next day, and as he explains to whoever opens the door, he's told that the girl he describes passed away years ago. Circumstances might vary, depending on who's telling the story, and that he met her ghost. Juarez Hospital and La Planchada. One of the oldest hospitals in Mexico, the Juarez, is famous for being the place where the legend of La Planchada originated. La Planchada, the Ironed Lady, the Ironed One, is a ghost nurse who has the unusual feat of appearing in hospitals all over Mexico. Her stories vary from person to person. She might be a nurse in love with a doctor that rejected her and ended up taking her own life, a nurse who killed her patient in vengeance for being rejected, or a nurse that was killed by the doctor themselves. A more modern version mentions she was one of the victims of the 1985 earthquake when the Juarez Hospital collapsed and dozens perished inside. The name comes from the fact that she appears wearing a perfectly ironed uniform, and she might walk, float, or have no feet, but she's always described as moving silently. La Planchada appears to patients during late hours and gives them a pill or medicine that somehow heals them, no matter what their disease is or their condition. When patients mention their encounter to a doctor or another nurse, they're told that no member of the staff was present or guarding the room at such hour. The Woman in the River. Back in 1992, The body of a woman was found next to a sewage river in the township of Naucalpan, north of Mexico City. Since then, people passing through the area at night mention encounters with a floating woman without visible feet, wearing a white dress. Bolivar's apartment. An apartment located in the corner of Bolivar and Cinco de Mayo, close to the Zocalo. It remains uninhabited, and previous occupants and neighbors tell stories about otherworldly noises coming from inside, as well as heavy objects being moved or dropped by unseen forces. The ghost of Azteca Stadium. Watchmen in the Azteca Stadium tell stories about a kid appearing during the night, asking for help. When watchmen or staff come closer, the kid disappears. It's believed that the kid died, crushed in a riot during a football match. The Concepcion Convent. During the Spanish colony, a woman named Maria Gil fell in love with a young woman named Arusha. Her siblings paid Arusha to leave the city and drop any idea of marrying Maria. She, in turn, was forced to become a nun, but could not bear the suffering produced by such failed relationship. So, one day, she got a rope and hung herself from a peach tree in the middle of the Concepcion Convent. The legend says that her ghost started appearing sometime later, looking like a rotting corpse, hanging from the same tree where Maria took her own life. The nuns chopped down the tree and prayed every day to make the spirit leave. The Children of San Isidro Graveyard. In Azcapotzalga, a northern borough of the city, there are stories about two ghost kids appearing in the San Isidro Graveyard and its surrounding areas. The first is known as Nene and is described as a young girl who appears outside the graveyard wall and is prone to causing car crashes in the Manuel Salazar Avenue by suddenly popping out in front of them. The second is David, who appeared to undertakers, asking them to tell his mother to let him go because she visited his grave every day. The Mexican ghostbuster Carlos Trejo supposedly taped a video of Nene appearing in the graveyard. La Casa de los Azulejos. In the corner of Madera and I Central, there is a building known as the House of Tiles, which is a restaurant these days. A few years ago, a remodeling project went awry because construction workers were supposedly harassed by a dark shade floating around the hallways. Patrons and restaurant staff talk about the same shade that floats up to the main stairs and vanishes as soon as it reaches the second floor. The boy in the theater. In the Mexico City's theater, sound technicians avoid wearing headphones while working, arguing that as soon as they put them on, they can hear the sound of a ball bouncing closer and closer, followed by the voice of a young boy, inviting them to play with him. Pablito. In the restaurant Ishel, located in Roma neighborhood, there is a story of a kid named Pablito, who is believed to have died many years ago by falling from a service stair. Pablito makes pranks, plays with water faucets, and moves chairs. A few watchmen have quit after seeing him. There is a dish dedicated to the ghost, in order to appease him. The Restaurant of Santo Domingo. The staff working in this restaurant, the oldest in Mexico City, accept the place is haunted, but say that the ghost is completely harmless, and according to the restaurant owners, it might have been a monk that inhabited the place before it was turned into a restaurant. A popular story among waiters and cooks is that the ghost appeared to a reporter some years ago, making her run away from the building. The Bride of Regina 39. In 1940, a young couple was about to get married. On the wedding day, the groom was nowhere to be seen, as he had overslept after a bachelor's party the night before. Furious, the bride cancelled the wedding and returned to the vecindad where the groom used to live, the building located in the number 39 of Regina Street. There, he stormed into the groom's apartment and stabbed him to death. The bride took her own life afterwards, but people living in the building have reported seeing a ghostly bride pacing back and forth the hallways, lamenting what she did. The Weeping Tunnel. In the township of San Pedro Barrientos, north of Mexico City, there is a structure known as the Castle of Barrientos, which is a military college today. Under the castle, there are tunnels where you can hear crying and sobbing, supposedly from victims of organized crime. There are bones sticking out the walls. Most of these tunnels have been closed by authorities of the military college. The ghosts of El Toreo de Cuatro Caminos. Until last decade, one of the most recognizable and famous landmarks in Mexico was El Toreo de Cuatro Caminos, a huge bullfighting arena crowned by a massive silver dome that could be seen from miles away. A few years before it was demolished, TV series and movies were filmed inside, as well as Halloween events. People working in the Halloween event, a haunted maze in the tunnels beyond the arena, constantly reported sightings of bullfighters covered in blood, doctors walking hurriedly through the rooms, and malfunctioning animatronics and electronic devices. Pick related, it's the arena. The Yakuza, or owl, is apparently an evil spirit, or sometimes a bruja. Its presence always is followed or preceded by death. They're often heard or seen right before a loved one dies, and or right after, as if to mock family and friends. I have a little short story of an encounter. My aunt, who was in her early 40s, was pregnant. She knew the risks, but wanted another child. Late in the pregnancy, she found out that the child would be born with Down syndrome and other possible ailments. When he was born, it was medical complications after complications. Then after a month at some UCSF hospital, his health improved and was all set to be sent home. The last week he was in the hospital, a woman visited the child. Apparently she claimed to be an aunt. She brought with her a stuffed animal, and she played with it above the baby and left it there. Then she left. Needless to say, the child's health worsened. His liver started failing. He was having respiratory problems. Just awful stuff. He died a few days later. The wake was held at his parents' home. Everything was normal and sad. Then people started crowding around the windows and rushing outside. On one of the trees outside the house, there was a barn owl perched, peering into the house, laughing, cackling, and when it was shooed away, it came right back to laugh and mock on the tree branch. Everyone knew what it was. It wasn't until my uncle brought out his shotgun and fired a shot at it that it flew away. Later that night, everyone could hear it fly overhead, screeching and laughing. Tlahuelpuchi. In rural Tlaxcala, Mexico, the vampire witches, known as Tlahuelpuchi, are much feared. At least 100 legends about them exist. The Tlahuelpuchi was a person believed to possess magical powers, including the power to transform themselves into one of several animals, and in that form, attack and suck out the blood of humans. They can be of either gender, but usually are females, who are considered to be more bloodthirsty and evil of the two. Elements found in Tlahuelpuchi can be traced to ancient Aztec goddesses. Their archetype was further modified to include influences from the witches of Spain when the country was converted to Christianity. Tlahuelpuchis are born into their fate. They cannot transmit or teach their powers to others. They are independent agents of evil, but will do the bidding of higher evil forces, such as the devil. When one is born, it cannot be distinguished from an ordinary infant. Differences do not emerge until puberty, at which point their supernatural powers, such as shape-shifting, suddenly manifest. For females, this often occurs with the onset of the menses. When the powers manifest, the Tlahuelpuchis of both sexes begin to have a lifelong, uncontrollable urge to drink human blood. They will drink the blood of any human, but have a marked preference for that of infants between the ages of 3 and 6 months, but no younger. They prowl about at night, usually between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m., but will operate during the day if their blood craving is extreme. They are not out every night, but only when they experience their uncontrollable blood urges, which ranges from 1 to 4 times a month. They are more active during rainy and cold weather. Finding one to be among them causes families a great deal of unhappiness and shame. They will go to great lengths to cover it up to avoid being ostracized by the community. It's said that they cannot attack members of their own families unless they reveal their secret, although they cannot transmit their powers to others of their own volition. If they are killed, the powers go into the killer. This places the family in the position of reluctant accomplices. The most common animal into which the witches transformed themselves was a turkey, but animals as varied as fleas, cats, dogs, and buzzards were reported. When shapeshifted, they are limited to the abilities of that particular creature and cannot make it perform in magical ways, with one exception: they can make turkeys fly. When in animal form, they give off a luminescence or phosphorescence that is a telltale sign for their identity. They steal into a home as a mist, sometimes luminous, that seeps under doors and windowsills or through keyholes, or they crawl in as an insect. Once inside, they shapeshift into a turkey or buzzard and hypnotize the occupants into a deep sleep so that they can carry out their attacks. They also have hypnotic power over individuals and could cause them to kill themselves, primarily by having them walk to a high place and jump to their death. They might kill or injure domestic and farm animals and could ruin crops. Thus, many types of misfortune were attributed to the work of witches. For obvious reasons, Tlahuelpuchi lived incognito in the communities. Belief in them is widespread in Mexico and continues to this day in rural areas. Cases of attacks have been recorded in modern times, some resulting in the trial and execution of the alleged vampire. As recently as 1954, the state of Tlaxcala passed a law requiring that infants reportedly killed by witchcraft had to be referred to medical authorities. While in almost every extended family, there will be reports of multiple bloodsuckings over the course of generations, the accusations of blood-sucking witchcraft that result in trial and execution historically have not been common and have declined considerably since the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The last known execution of a Tlahuelpuchi, a woman, occurred in 1973.